It's never a good idea to jump to conclusions, viewers, especially in the unpredictable and fickle Trumpian megaverse, so to speak. But even so, you'd have to be particularly cynical to deny that the Modi-Trump meeting went off better than what many people had predicted. In the run-up to this conversation, and we've talked about this, many people had projected anxieties about the state of India's relations with the United States and the fact that Trump, in his second iteration, would be less mindful of niceties. Now, viewers, we have with us the best view from Delhi, so to speak, the best experts. Some of them have been in government, others have watched affairs from policy circles very, very closely. And I want to open this up very quickly to our esteemed panel. Now, I want to begin first with ex-Foreign Secretary, Mr. Sibal, who requires no introduction. Mr. Sibal, how do you feel this conversation went? Better than expected, at par with expectations? Or was it, as some people here had suggested, that Mr. Modi was going cap in hand, or he was going to be genuflecting before the eminence Greece that is Trump? Some people had suggested that he was going there as a supplicant in the Trump court. How do you see it?
Oh, certainly it has gone better than expected. Despite some concerns, I think the visit proved to be well-timed. It was a good idea to engage Trump very early to set the tone for the relationship and also to preempt possible surprises, because Trump, as you know, is unpredictable. So in a sense, we had already taken some steps beforehand to try and pacify some of his concerns, but it was a good idea to meet him very early and set the tone of our ties in what you can call Trump 2.0. And also, I think Modi was able to capitalize on the personal chemistry that he had established with Trump during his first term. Now, it was not enough depending on Trump's team, in which we have a lot of people who have been very positive towards India, like the National Security Advisor Walsh or Mark Rubio, or for that matter, Tulsi Gabbard, because briefing them through other channels and at other levels is simply not enough, given the fact that Trump is completely in charge. And I don't think that he's got too much, he gives too much attention to details or briefings. I mean, he has an impressionist kind of a foreign policy. Therefore, directly engaging him, to my mind, was very important. I was a bit surprised at frankly, happily surprised at the positive elements in the joint statement. And it has been cleverly drafted in the sense that we have, in a sense, adjusted to his priorities in terms of focusing on defense and tariffs in the joint statement. Normally, if you see joint statements with the United States and others, defense figures pretty low down in the statements because these trips are not meant to be defense-oriented in that sense, and we are not allies of the United States of America. But it begins with paragraphs on defense, which in fact outline the clear intention of the two sides to strengthen their defense ties. And some specific items have also been mentioned, like Stryker carrier, armored carriers, as well as Javelin, more exercises, etc., etc. So let's see how it goes. Trump has also mentioned, the joint statement also mentions the availability of fifth-generation aircraft, which means they're going to push for F-35. But I don't think that is going to, frankly, reach anywhere. But from our side, and then, of course, on trade, we have set this target of $500 billion by 2030. $500 billion is an old target that was set up some years ago. But let's see. But the important thing is that the whole issue of tariffs imposed on Indian exports has been, for the moment, handled well. We have gained time because the joint statement refers to an agreement to negotiate the first tranche of multi-sector bilateral trade agreement by 2025 fall. This will be part of the larger compact, which is catalyzing opportunities for military partnership, accelerated commerce, and technology. Interestingly, the United States has recognized that we have taken already some steps to reduce tariffs on bourbon and motorcycles and ICT products and metals and alfalfa, hay, and duck meat and medical devices, etc. It's a good thing that this has been recognized in the joint statement that we are moving in the direction of reducing our tariffs. Trump has been very, very pressing not only the United States but also the European Union to buy more gas and oil from the United States of America. And here we have agreed to increase the volumes of our energy trade. And this will include, of course, the nuclear weapon, the civil nuclear agreement, where we have agreed, where they've noted that we have revised some of our laws and we are now going to have discussions on modular reactors, etc. From our time, and that's important from our side, we were interested in preserving the ICET, the Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. And this has been done, though we knew that on their side, they're going to change the nomenclature because anything that Biden has done doesn't appeal to this administration. So now it's called US-India Trust. So it doesn't matter what it is called, but they have agreed that they will, both sides will push this agenda, including preserving Indus X platform, which is now called Indus Innovation. There's also an agreement on establishing trusted and resilient supply chains in the semiconductor, critical materials, advanced materials, and pharmaceuticals. The Mineral Security Partnership, which has become very important in terms of all the advanced technologies that China has developed, and the fact that they control large percentage of these minerals.
Right.
There again, it has been decided to secure this partnership. Now, incidentally, on the defense side, I didn't mention there is this new initiative, Asia, on Autonomous Systems Industry Alliance. Now, finally, they're on the Indian Ocean region and Quad. There's not that kind of emphasis that has been there in the past, but nevertheless, the right language has been used. On H-1B visas, although the H-1B visas are not mentioned, but if you look at the language in the joint statement, there's recognition that innovative, mutually advantageous, and secure mobility framework agreement for students and professionals should be examined, which is a good thing. And then finally, on this whole issue about Khalistanis and this and that, although it's not mentioned directly, but there is a para which says that elements that threaten public and diplomatic safety and security and sovereignty and territorial integrity of both nations should be tackled. This also includes the Panun affair, frankly, when you talk about integrity, sovereignty of countries. But even if you talk of territorial integrity, nobody is challenging the territorial integrity of the United States. So clearly, this is a reference to the Khalistanis. Finally, it's interestingly, there's no mention of Ukraine, there's no mention of Gaza, which means on these issues, the United States is taking the lead itself and will do as it likes, except that there is a reference to the implementation of the India-Middle East Economic Corridor as well as ITU2. And finally, Prime Minister invited Modi to the Quad Summit later in the year. This has been noted, though of course there is no commitment that has been given by the US side. But the fact that they've included this means that they will set the dates for this later.
Okay.
All in all, good statement.
Okay, let me bring in Mr. Chileni now. Mr. Chileni, On tariffs, while there was some familiar jousting from Trump in the presence of Mr. Modi, the joint statement committed the two sides to evolving I feel, a mutually exclusive trade deal, which shows that DC doesn't want to punish Delhi with an all or nothing tariff blanket. And there were some other concessions also. On illegal immigration, we weren't bracketed alongside Mexico. If you remember, Trump had said that Mexico doesn't send their best, he said. Sending people that are bringing lots of problems like drugs, crime. But here it seems that Trump is taking a bit of a wide-angle approach to India on this issue. Do you think this has been a better than expected outcome?
It has been a good trip, a trip that has been a good start to restoring the momentum in the US-India relationship. That momentum had stalled during the Biden presidency. And it's also important that Modi's visit came on the heels of the Japanese Prime Minister Ishiba's visit to the White House. And when you see these two visits in the context of what Trump is seeking to do, end the war in Ukraine, that will allow the US to shift its strategic focus to the Indo-Pacific, which is the world's emerging economic and geopolitical hub. Barack Obama in 2011 had unveiled this policy of pivot to Asia, but 14 years later, there has been no pivot to Asia or to the Indo-Pacific. And I think that ending the war in Ukraine will allow the US to finally pivot to the Indo-Pacific, making America's ties with New Delhi and Tokyo even more critical. So in that sense, Modi's trip was a good start to mending this relationship and restoring the momentum in this relationship. But I think on the issue of trade, tariffs, and hydrocarbons, these are priority areas for Trump. Unfortunately, in India, and I've seen that with all our visits, to Washington by leaders in the past, that we focus too much on what the Americans want. We don't focus on what issues are of importance to us. We focus on how we can actually save ourselves from the American demands. Again, during this visit, the focus was how can we please Trump? How can we escape his tariff dragnet? But the fact is that I'll answer your question on tariffs, but the real issue for India is that in India's own neighborhood, the divergence of US and Indian interests has become stark. The US should be working with India in India's own neighborhood. It shouldn't be working against India's interests. But we saw during the Biden presidency that in India's immediate neighborhood, the US was working against India's interests. And I think the issue that the question that we need to ask ourselves is, will this change? Now that Trump and Modi have had detailed discussions, will the US work with India? Now, it's one thing to say, okay, US and India are going to be partners in Asia and the larger world. But if they can't be partners in India's own neighborhood, how can there be mutual trust to be partners in Asia or the wider world? For example, Trump was asked during this news conference whether, he was asked, the question was about the deep state, the US deep state's role in Bangladesh.
True.
He dodged that question, but he flatly said there was no role for our deep state in Bangladesh.
True.
Now, it's very important to note what he said, because he rails against the US deep state in terms of what the deep state does at home in the US. He talks about the deep state all the time, about its evil designs, as he puts it. But he has never, to my knowledge, ever spoken against or spoken about US deep state operations overseas, not even the US deep state regime change in Ukraine that provoked Russia's occupation of Crimea. So it's very interesting that that even on Bangladesh, which has become a very sensitive issue for India, that he dodged that question, but while dodging it, saying I will let the Prime Minister answer the question on Bangladesh, but before he dodged that, he said flatly that there was no role for our deep state in Bangladesh.
Yes.
Now this is prominent news in Bangladesh media because this is they feel vindicated.
Yeah.
But the real issue is that given the divergence, of U.S. and Indian interests in India's immediate neighborhood, whether that divergence will narrow now. It actually shouldn't just narrow.
But Mr. Chileni, there was, of course, a question also put about certain other activities. The slightly, as you said, divergent view. Now, I just want to bring in Sushant Sareen because that question was quite instructive. If you remember, the answer from Trump on that was that, Biden and his administration's approach to diplomacy with India was gross incompetence. So he was also suggesting that I'm not going to go down that route. But first of all, your views, Mr. Sareen, on this entire meeting, and then perhaps will America work with India in our own neighborhood? And what does he mean when he sort of distances America from the gross incompetence of Biden's diplomacy and its approach towards ties with India? What does that mean for us?
So, Rahul, I think as far as the visit goes and as far as whatever the understandings that were reached, I think it's the best under the circumstances. There are many other countries which are anticipating far worse. As far as India is concerned, I think nothing unexpected really happened as far as even tariffs is concerned. Frankly, look, if the Americans want to sell some more Harley Davidsons, how many Harley Davidsons will they sell out in India? How much alpha will they sell in India? Come on, give me a break. How much? We like Scotch whiskey, we don't even like bourbon, right? Bourbon is used for cocktail. How much bourbon will they sell? So, there is a limit to what they are going to tariff you on and how this whole tariff regime is going to work. And I'm sure there'll be experts who will sit down and break it down. But I don't really see anything really untoward having come out of it or anything really negative having come out of this visit as far as India is concerned. On the contrary, I think a lot of positives have come. There's one particular issue on which I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. In the line or in the paragraph on military operations or military cooperation, I can understand the bit about training and about exercises, but there's something about operations. I'm just wondering, and maybe Mr. Sibal can come in later and explain whether this is normal, or are India and the US going to do operations jointly somewhere? And this fits in with the next line in that whole thing about supporting and sustaining US missions in various parts, or the US supporting Indian missions. We don't have any overseas missions. So, so as far as the broad outlines is concerned, I think there are only positives. I don't see any negative. On the political questions, look, in the region, the Americans for some time have always given us the lead. Even when Nepal, there were problems in Nepal, they were telling us, you take the lead, we will follow your lead. Okay. Question is, what do we want to do? What are our instrumentalities for achieving what we want to do in Nepal or in Bangladesh or any other country? And I think we need to be clear on that count. Are we ready to play that game the way that game is to be played with a certain degree of ruthlessness? Or will we say, that, nahi yaar, ultimately inko akal aa jayegi, they'll come back to us, right? Where else will they go? What is their option they have? So I think we also need to be very clear on how much of a lead we want to take, how much of hardball we want to play, how much of softball we want to play. And that doesn't mean that the Americans are not going to try and, do their own thing. Of course they will. But which is also then a part of how much of clout we exercise in the region, that where we can tell them that, okay, fine, this far and no further. So, there is some amount of responsibility, and I get the point which Brahma is trying to make. But my point is, there's some amount of, we need to also look into the mirror and say, okay, look, did we falter somewhere? Did we not play the game the way it should have been played? Were we caught unawares about what the Americans were trying to do? For example, forget Bangladesh. The Americans have been trying to do that stuff in India, right? Every goddamn Netflix film has a gay, transgender, LGBTQ agenda. How come it's suddenly happening? Is this the normal mainstream of India? Every Prime movie has that. Every OTT platform has that trash now, right? So they've been trying to do stuff in India as well. Have we put a stop to it? Did we not understand what they were trying to do? There's enough published material to tell us what they were trying to do in Bangladesh. Should our agencies and should our foreign office not have been aware about what they were trying to do and try to tell them or try and preempt them or do something to carry the day in another direction?
Sure.
So I think we need to look into ourselves also. The Americans have their interests, we have our interests. Most of the time these converge. There will be some times when we disagree with each other and there will be divergences. At least in our region, we should be able to press ahead with what our interests are and get the Americans on board rather than trying to take the American lead.
Okay. Let me bring in Mr. Sibal on that point, Mr. Serene, that you want a clarification on, or an explanation rather. What is this exact clause that you would want Mr. Sibal to discuss? You said about operations, supporting, sustaining, missions, etc.
It's in that strategic, in the first part only. I think it's number 8 or something.
Okay.
If somebody has the text, I don't have the text in front of me.
Okay. So Mr.
If
Sibal, how do you interpret that, if you can...
Look, when we signed the logistics agreement, what did it mean? It means that we are giving access to the Americans, to our naval, air and land bases, facilities rather, and vice versa. But vice versa for us is not that important because we are not operating in areas close to the United States of America. But in some scenario, it might be possible for us to have access to some of the U.S. Facilities, as for example in the Western Pacific, and there are plenty.
What about the operations?
But the fact that we are talking about operational cooperation and this and that, one can imagine a scenario, for example, where they might want to use our facilities in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. And I think we are open to that in certain circumstances. So this is to underline that we can, as part of strengthening our military ties, we can look at possibilities where we can be more actively participate in operations, but we have to be extremely careful in this regard. It's one thing to put this in the joint statement. The other is to actually look at what is being proposed and how it serves our national interests, and does this then involve us in unnecessary conflicts which the United States may provoke in the Western Pacific, for example. And mind you, even in terms of the logistics agreements that we have with the United States, it's not as if it is a free-for-all.
Right.
We have to give our political permission for that.
That's right.
But there's no harm if you...
Okay, well, so, no, I understand that. I mean, there has been in the past a request that was made under even the Vajpayee government, etc., and we all remember those times. But, and that was during the Gulf War conflict, etc., and even before that. So one does understand that there have been those requests in the past, but obviously India, that's always a political decision. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for putting this into perspective for us. Mr. Chileni, thank you for taking out your time. Mr. Sibal, likewise, as well as, of course, Mr. Serene. Thank you very much.
Now, the CVC has asked CPWD to conduct a detailed investigation on allegations that building norms were floated to construct a lavish mansion covering 40,000